Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Tom Cruise feels the need for speed in the long-awaited sequel, Top Gun: Maverick. Over 30 years after the original film, Captain Pete Mitchell, aka Maverick, played by Tom Cruise, has resisted a promotion that would ground him, but ends up in hot water after destroying a prototype while disobeying orders. Thanks to the intervention of Iceman, now an admiral, played by Val Kilmer, Maverick finds himself reassigned back to NAS North Island and the Top Gun program, this time to teach a group of graduates for a special mission to destroy a uranium plant that can only be achieved if they fly like Maverick. Among the pilots is Glenn Powell's Hangman, Lewis Pullman's Bob, Monica Barbaro's Phoenix, Jay Ellis's Payback, Danny Ramirez's Fanboy, Greg Tarzan Davis's Coyote, and Miles Teller's Bradley Bradshaw, aka Rooster, the son of Goose, and Maverick will be forced to confront his past once again. I have to admit, I'm not really a big fan of the original Top Gun. It always struck me as one of those movies where you go, you had to be there at the time, and unfortunately I wasn't, on account of not being born yet. So when I did finally catch up with that movie in my teens, I have to admit, I was left a little bit disappointed by it. Yes, the aerial photography in that movie is fantastic. Even to this day, it was outstanding for its time, and I do like a lot of Tony Scott's movies, but it's not one of my favourites of his. But certainly, Scott's direction is very proto-Michael Bay, lots of sunsets and magic hours, lots of motorbike riding and fighter jets. It's very macho and testosterone-driven, which of course also makes it one of the most unintentionally homoerotic movies ever made. Seriously, there are so many scenes of people in their boxers dripping wet. You know, I've never seen that many scenes of that outside of a David Dakota 1313 movie. The problem with Top Gun for me, however, is that once it gets on the ground, you have to deal with the script, which is very threadbare, to say the least. But Top Gun's biggest success was in terms of cultural impact, in the fact that not only was it a fantastic propaganda piece for the US Navy, who literally had recruitment tables set outside of screenings in some areas, but also cemented Tom Cruise as a bona fide movie star, one that he has managed to retain for the last 3 decades, almost 4 now. And Top Gun 2 has been long gestating. Apparently there was actually a script written a few years after the original, but it got scuttled by the fact that Cruise didn't want to make another pro-military movie, especially coming off Born on the 4th of July. Although in the meantime we did get a spiritual sequel with Cruise and Scott reuniting for Days of Thunder, which is basically Top Gun but in the NASCAR world. But it failed to really recreate that loving feeling that audiences had for Top Gun. Now, 36 years after the original, we finally get a follow-up, and it sees Cruise reunite with a number of his regular co-collaborators, including Joseph Kosinski, who previously directed him in Oblivion. You might also be familiar with Kosinski from Tron Legacy, and of course Christopher McQuarrie is also on this movie as well, having done a script rewrite for him. Of course, McQuarrie works regularly with Cruise, not only to brush up his scripts, but also directing the Mission Impossible movies. And also, the weight has been added onto by the fact that the movie was delayed by COVID. This was meant to come out in the summer of 2020, but of course, this is the last of those movies that were shelved to finally come out. And I can actually safely say that it is well worth the wait, even if you didn't like the original in the first place. But if you are a fan of the original Top Gun, you'll feel right at home because the movie stokes those nostalgia fires hard right from the outset. The opening credits sequence is designed to be a shot-for-shot recreation of the same thing from its predecessor, even down to identical font choices for the credits themselves, and that includes location captions which also look identical to the original film. And that is just one of many many things that are deliberate homages to the original Top Gun, or just outright replicated, like the volleyball scene. There's a shot where Maverick rides his motorbike next to a fighter jet flying next to him. There's a sequence where Maverick takes off on the carrier that is another moment that is deliberately designed to be a shot-for-shot recreation of a similar sequence from its predecessor. And these actually go down deeper as well, because if you actually concentrate on it, the basic structure of Top Gun Maverick, at least for good chunks of it, is deliberately designed to follow many of the same beats as the original. So the film opens with Maverick disobeying an order and getting chastised for it, and then getting reassigned to Top Gun exactly like he was in the first movie. There is a sequence where Maverick goes to a pilot bar and he gets disrespected, unaware that he is actually teaching those students the following day. Exactly the same thing that happened with Maverick when he first met Kelly McGillis's character in the original Top Gun, except the roles have been flipped around in this instance. So there is a lot of things that play with that. And if that was all that Top Gun Maverick was doing, I would roundly chastise it, like I have done many legacy sequels, but it also has a lot more up its sleeve. The long gap between sequels has definitely done interesting things to Top Gun. The original Top Gun was rightfully criticised for its lack of substance underneath that flash and bravado, whereas Top Gun Maverick does actually have substance behind it. There is a surprising amount of dramatic heft to the movie, and it isn't simply to do with all the callbacks. Yes, it does draw a lot of its energy from its relationship to its predecessor and expanding upon those characters greatly, but it works so well that it doesn't require you to like the original or even have seen it to work properly. In fact, there are fairly judicious flashbacks through the movie if you haven't seen the original film, which, given the time between movies, I would suspect a substantial portion of the audience actually haven't. It works as its own story. It isn't simply calling back to the original like so many of these legacy sequels are. It has something new to say and offer. And like many Tom Cruise movies, it's of course about Tom Cruise in some way, and Top Gun Maverick is about his relationship with aging, which Cruise has tried to defy as best as he can over the years, and he is still remarkably spry for a guy that is pushing 60. Hell, he probably looks better at his age than I do just past 30. But even so, he is still but a mere mortal. In fighter jet pilot terms, he's an absolute dinosaur. It is frankly astounding that he's up there in the skies at all. But even so, it shows Cruise in remarkably fallible fashion for someone that has redefined himself as an indestructible action hero over the last decade or so. Characters refer to Maverick as old man disrespectfully, and they are right. He is old in this movie, and there is no getting around that. In fact, it even becomes part of the text at the very beginning, because the reason that Maverick gets in trouble is that he tries to do a manned mission against the orders of Kane, who is definitely in favour of drone pilots. And this technological angle doesn't actually take up too much focus of the movie, but it does offer us a key scene between Kane, played briefly but reliably by a stony-faced Ed Harris, and Maverick that has some pertinent lines of dialogue, not least of which Kane telling Maverick, "The future's coming, and you're not in it." To which Maverick replies, "Maybe so, but not today." And he could just be talking about Cruise himself, the last of the movie stars of his generation to have that same kind of level of success, while many of his peers have either faded away or retired, whereas Cruise has responded to cinema becoming more of a spectacle-based medium by becoming the spectacle himself and doing all these outrageous stunts that genuinely make you fear for his safety. That kind of tension comes baked into these movies now, and that's partially why they're so effective. But it is also an intergenerational movie. Cruise, at the beginning of his career, starred in Top Gun, and there is a kind of bookending with this movie that almost echoes Paul Newman, who of course starred with him in The Colour of Money. This is the equivalent movie, but in the reverse. So Cruise has now become like Paul Newman was in that past generation. So in that kind of relationship, it is about Cruise kind of reconciling with the fact that he is the last of that kind of old school movie star. There is a metatextual element that gives it a little bit of weight. You're not just watching Maverick, you're watching Tom Cruise. The line between character and performer has been blurred in Cruise's recent movies, no more so than it is here. Cruise has made a lifetime cheating death, but time catches up with all of us in one way or another. That's what the movie is about, and it does so most poignantly in the reunion with Iceman. As you're probably no doubt aware, Val Kilmer has endured major health struggles over the last few years, to the point where it has robbed him of his voice. So Iceman does reappear in this movie, but largely he is an off-screen presence. He appears largely through text messages with Maverick, but he does get one scene in the movie, and it's an incredibly moving moment to see these actors reunited, especially given what has happened with Kilmer over the last few years, and of course they have worked that into the character, in that the character is enduring the same struggles as Kilmer is, and so Iceman largely communicates by typing out his lines on a monitor for Maverick to read. Kilmer does have two lines that are dubbed by another actor, but largely he communicates through text in this movie, and it's a remarkably affecting moment, especially given the relationship between the two characters. Kilmer was a standout in the original movie. He stole scenes playing his bitter rival turned friend, and seeing that reunion, it's hard not to be affected by it. Kilmer apparently was really desperate to be in this movie, and Cruise fought for him to be there. And it's really fantastic that he did, because it's one of the best moments in the movie. It's genuinely a bit of a tearful moment, in all honesty. It's just great to have Kilmer in the movie at all. He's very lucky to be here. And in other ways, Maverick is still dealing with the death of Goose all throughout the movie. He still holds himself responsible. That is what the conversation with Iceman is all about, that he still is holding on to these feelings even decades later, to the point where Maverick is still asking Goose to talk to him like he did at the end of the first movie. He still calls out for his lost friend. And so there is always that nagging feeling that death is right around the corner, but the movie takes a hopeful approach in that ultimately we need to overcome that to live overall. Which of course brings me to Rooster, because Maverick wasn't the only one dealing with the consequences of that fatal ejection incident. Rooster's been living with it his entire life. It robbed him of his father, and he's got a massive chip on his shoulder. He is filled with pent-up aggression and anger, especially directed towards Maverick, who he still feels accountable in some way for what happened, but also because Maverick personally intervened to defer his application to become a fighter jet pilot in the first place. He feels like he's been robbed of precious years, so he goes into the training program feeling like he has something to prove, and he pushes himself very hard, and to the point where Maverick has to try and control his temper and try and push past that in some way. The relationship between the two characters is the backbone of this sequel, and I've definitely ran very hot and cold on Miles Teller over the years. I've found him insufferable in some other movies, but he's also been fantastic in movies like Whiplash, and certainly in the last few years he's not really been a very major presence, but this is the best performance that he's given in quite a few years. Teller is genuinely very well cast. He has the right kind of cocky bravado that the role requires, because he is basically Maverick. It's two versions of that character kind of butting heads with each other, but also he is the manifestation of his father. He certainly looks a lot like Anthony Edwards in the original movie, and he is literally a personification in some ways of Maverick's guilt. He looks at him and he sees his lost friend, and he feels like he owes it to his old buddy to protect him, even if Rooster doesn't understand that that's what he's trying to do. And because Maverick has those feelings so close to the forefront, that's always what he's thinking about. When he's thinking about all these young, fresh-faced recruits in front of him, he's thinking of what way can he teach them not to get killed, to not be another person that he has to hold on his conscience. That is what he's doing throughout the entirety of the movie. And certainly the recruits are actually very well played by each of the respective cast members, who all make them very distinctive and memorable personalities, although some are meant to be deliberate echoes of the past once again, specifically Glenn Powell's character, who is definitely meant to be a pseudo-equivalent to Iceman. One thing that's very noticeable about these new pilots is that they're a much more diverse bunch than the original, which was largely very white and very male, whereas here we have a female pilot and we have pilots of colour. And whether this was an intentional decision or not, that does appear to have largely diffused one major element of the original film, the homoeroticism. There is far less of that in Top Gun Maverick, and it does seem like that maybe might have been a choice on the part of the filmmakers. There's far less scenes of people just running around in their underwear. Yes, of course, there is that major scene that references that the volleyball scene is in this movie, and everyone gets their guns out and their clothes off. It's a proper ab show, really. But there is not much aside from that, and I do have to admit, on some level, I was a little bit disappointed, because that is part of the fun of Top Gun, whether it was intended or not, and I can't help but think that some viewers might come away feeling a little bit shortchanged in that regard. And I just think that this is probably just on account of the fact that because of the way the attitude has shifted between films, it does feel like actually that kind of macho BS that characterised so much of the original film is actually largely missing here, and as a result, that particular element and that particular common reading of the original film is largely absent here, and whether that is a strike against it or not will largely come down to your preference. I think the other reason why the original film gets so commonly read that way is that while it's meant to be a romance, Cruise and Kelly McGillis never actually had all that much chemistry with each other. I never felt like their romance was particularly plausible, and certainly the teacher-student dynamic of it has not particularly aged well, whereas here, the love interest angle with Jennifer Connelly's character Penny, who is actually meant to be a reference to a throwaway line from the first movie, that works so much better. Penny is someone that has grown up around the Navy. She knows exactly what it's like, and so she feels like a strong, assertive character. Connelly knows exactly what she's doing, and certainly there is the sense that in some ways, she's kind of like Maverick, especially in the fact that she likes to sail boats. She is on the water like Maverick is. There's a moment where she's riding in her boat and the boat is almost tipped into the water. Like, it's astonishing that the boat is still managing to keep upright without managing to capsize itself. But Connelly actually manages to make the love interest character feel fully rounded. And that's a credit to how fantastic Connelly is as a performer. She's reuniting with Kosinski here. She previously worked on his last movie, Only the Brave, which this does feel a bit tonally similar to, in some ways. But yeah, Connelly and Cruise really do work together in this movie, and their romance genuinely feels credible. That's another element of this movie that is a substantial improvement on its predecessor. But of course, the real star of the show is the flying sequences, which are, in a word, sensational. Just absolutely jaw-dropping stuff. What Cruise has recognised is that in an age of blockbusters that are filled with wall-to-wall CGI, we've become very accustomed to the fantastical, because we know in the back of our mind that it's all being made in a computer, whereas what Cruise has done by pushing himself and his cast to do all these stunts in camera, he's managed to achieve a sense of wonder about it, a sense of genuine daredevil suspense about the entire thing, in the same way that Jackie Chan and his contemporaries used to back in the day. And just on a sheer technical level, the fact they've managed to shrink the cameras into the cockpit so that you feel like you're actually inside with the pilots, I genuinely think that watching this movie is the closest that any viewer can feel like they're a fighter pilot without literally applying to be in the Navy. This gives you the exact experience of what it feels like, even in the regular presentation, let alone if you decide to kick your ass in 4DX for this movie, or see it in IMAX, because of course the movie was shot with IMAX cameras, so if you see it in that format, you will get more picture on the top and bottom, which will immerse you even more into the flight sequences. Even so, just watching any of these scenes, it is absolutely white knuckle. You get a genuine sense of respect for fighter jet pilots because it gives you that real sense of speed. I mean, that famous quote, I feel the need for speed. Well, you're gonna get it, and then some. Because you get a real sense of the instant decision making that has to be done, just flying around on instinct. And every time there's a stunt that happens on screen, you just go, wow, they actually did that? They actually used jets in that way to do something like that? And then the next stunt happens and you go, wow, they actually did that? What? This is just bonkers. Absolutely bonkers this movie is. Prepare for your fingertips to make solid acquaintances with the armrest of your seat. Obviously the movie's not perfect. The last act of the film, and the climax in particular, veers into some very silly territory. I guess the film is trying to evoke the sense of other 80s action films alongside Top Gun, but it feels like that's not quite on the same footing as the rest of the movie, which is a bit more serious in tone. But even so, I do have to admit that once I managed to kind of get past that and accept what was going on, I didn't mind it too much, because genuinely, I was having fun with it, like I was with the aerial sequences. Yes, it is totally daft, completely ridiculous, but you know what? If any movie had kind of earned the right to actually do something like that, it's this one, in all honesty, especially because I did genuinely think, like, the movie could actually end on a bit of a downer. I genuinely don't know what's going to happen to these characters, to the point where the movie is explicitly manipulating your emotions because of that. But of course, the movie is meant to be popcorn entertainment, and in that respect, it delivers on that in the final section of the movie, even if I do have problems with it. And it is also extremely notable that the movie goes well out of its way to avoid any semblance of political commentary whatsoever, right down to the fact that the uranium plant is not actually part of any identifiable country whatsoever. It's just like, you know, Evilsville. We have to attack Evilsville. There's no actual, like, anything that would make it connected to our reality in any real way, which again feels like a very conscious choice on the part of the filmmakers, which again, I do have to remind you, this is technically propaganda for the Navy, so that kind of makes sense, but even so, I would also imagine that having those political elements might unnecessarily complicate things and date the movie somewhat. I can sort of see that as well. Regardless, Top Gun Maverick is hugely entertaining. Top Gun Maverick is that rare thing. It is a sequel that is head and shoulders above its predecessor in almost every single department. The original Top Gun, it may be iconic, but it's not really a classic, at least in my opinion. But Top Gun Maverick is absolutely a modern classic. In terms of action filmmaking, this is just one of the best examples in recent memory. This is Cruise in just full star power mode. It is an absolutely outstanding bit of filmmaking. Yes, it does have its faults on a script level like the original did, although not to the same extent, but in terms of just those sheer flying sequences, you just need to see this on the biggest screen you can possibly find. And also, it does genuinely work as drama. I was genuinely completely invested in this movie, in spite of the fact that I wasn't a fan of the original film. That is the absolute accomplishment here, that even if you didn't care for the original, it will still manage to make you care about this in some way. That is really, honestly, the highest praise that I can give for this movie. If you like this review, then you can tip your wings over at my Ko-fi page, or with YouTube's brand new super thanks feature in the comments right below the video. Or you can really take flight at my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early among other perks, including access to my Discord server. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.